Hey, Talent Warriors, welcome to another episode of the Talent War Podcast. And today's special guest, retired Navy Captain William Toti. And he's written this amazing book, From CO to CEO. We're going to talk about all the things that it takes that veterans should know from his practical guide to transitioning from the military to the corporate world. And we're going to talk about how companies can really take advantage of this amazing hiring pool of veterans that are exiting the military. So stand by to learn some great information, especially if you're a company, as to how you can get back in the fight for the war for talent and win with military veterans. Stand by. Hey, Talent Warriors, welcome back to the Talent War Podcast. And as my intro said, we're talking to Bill Toti, who has written, which I think is going to be a bestseller, From CO to CEO. And welcome, Bill, to the Talent War Podcast. It's good to have you.
Thanks, George. Happy to be here.
So, you've got a very lengthy bio, which I only cover a little bit. Mm-hmm. But you've had you've had two careers.
I have, yeah.
So walk me through, and you're going to have to go slow because you're Navy and I'm Army, and we do have some Army listeners.
That's good.
So walk me through, your career. Bring us up to the point before you wrote the book.
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually joint. So I served a lot with Army. I've worked for Army bosses. In fact, one of my favorite bosses was Colin Powell, who I worked for on the joint staff. But anyway, yeah, I did 26 years on active duty, George. And, I'm not sure I planned it that way. In fact, we had in my class at the Academy, class of 1979, we had this motto, out the door in 84, because 1984 was when our 5-year commitment would end. And, honestly, I decided to keep doing it until I wasn't enjoying it anymore. And what happened was suddenly 26 years had gone by. And
wow,
it happened so quickly that it's not like I planned the career that way. I would say that in every case, I tried to keep my options open as far as, what I would do on active duty. And I kept, getting promoted, getting screened. So I ended up commanding a submarine. After that, a submarine squadron. I was Commodore of a submarine squadron. But I suddenly got to this point where I said, look, if I don't transition to my civilian career soon, and nobody said this to me, it was just one of those things where I believed that at some point in my life, I would be too old, and I'm going to put the word old in quotes, to have a viable full second career, which is what I wanted. I didn't want to transition out of the military and then just have a job for a few years and retire. I wanted a full second career. And, assuming that you retire at around age 65, which is where I am right now, by the way, and you want a 20-year second career, that it said to me that I needed to make the move, in my mid-40s, and, in order to have that 20-year second career. I didn't actually know what I was doing. But it turns out that rule, if it is a rule, is a pretty good one. Because what I was looking for, George, was I wanted to work for a company that was willing to invest in me. And we'll talk about that later, right? I was a transitioning military officer. I had commanded at senior levels, but I did not know what it was going to take to succeed in industry. Mm-hmm. And I knew that it was going to take some investment on my employer's part for me to learn what it was going to take to succeed in industry. And the only way that employer would invest in me is if I had enough time to return that investment back to them. And so that's why I made the move when I did.
So what year did you actually transition out?
2006. So
wow.
I've been in industry about 16 years now. So I did 26 years on active duty, then 16 years in industry, and culminating in a position as CEO of a defense company, a company called Spartan. And so the plan worked kind of as I hoped it would, through luck and serendipity and a little bit of planning. And your podcast, George, it says you need to hire veterans, where you give all the right reasons for companies to hire veterans. is spot on. And what I try to do is, over the course of my industry career, when I was junior in industry, I learned that my companies were hiring veterans and wanted to hire veterans for the right reasons, for
Yeah.
altruistic reasons, and because they knew their veterans could give back. But what I learned was all too often those veterans were failing.
Yeah.
And they were failing because of a lack of alignment between what the company believed the veteran could contribute and what the veteran believed his or her job was going to be. And when those veterans failed, it made a already stressful situation transitioning into a new life in industry much more stressful. And so over the years, I decided that I needed to do something about it. And that's why I ended up writing the book.
At Talent War Group, we truly believe that leadership is the single most vital factor in your company's success. There are many capable leaders, but finding the right one for your company and the role requires you to go beyond identifying a simple, functional, or resume fit. And this is what our executive search will do for you. We will go beyond what you're used to. Experience tells you where you've been, and character tells you where you're going. So instead of looking solely at a candidate's experience and the competitors that they've been at, we'll focus on their leadership traits, the optimal drivers for performance, and the potential for their success to determine who you should select. Because talent can't be seen, but you can assess character. We'll begin by evaluating your organization and identifying the success profile for that particular role. We'll help you design a process that effectively assesses the candidate's character attributes, those attributes that will help the candidate multiply success in your organization. We'll look at the team dynamics. We'll look at what's missing, what's needed, and what's been great before. Finally, once we find the right candidate, it doesn't stop there. We stay in contact with you and the candidate to mentor, coach, and develop, and to ensure success for the candidate and for your company. Yes, we're different. We know what drives performance. We know how to identify potential. You can get started by finding us at talentwargroup.com and let us help you develop your next generation of leaders. See, you and I shared that background. So I enlisted in 84. So when you would have been given the opportunity to get out the door, I got the leadership bug, became an officer.
Yeah.
And like you, I had no plan. I was like, well, I'm going to keep going as long as this is fun. And people know from the podcast, my career, I fell ass backwards into all of the career enhancing positions about a year too early. And so I came out of command at 2.5 years time and grade as an 03. And I'm like, I've got nothing but time to be a PowerPoint ranger. Back then it was Harvard Graphics, which really gives away our age. So I was a Harvard Graphics ranger.
Yeah.
But when I jumped out,
I think.
Yeah, I jumped out, the pre-internet age, pre-LinkedIn. Well, not pre-internet, but no LinkedIn. You were still faxing resumes. And I went through a veterans firm. How did you find your opportunity when you transitioned?
A headhunter. And it was a wonderful opportunity. I talk about that in the book, in fact, because I do deal in the book with how to interface with headhunters and things like how to deal with multiple offers if you're lucky enough to get multiple offers. But like you, I enlisted in 1974, not 1984. And I applied for the academy shortly after I enlisted and then was accepted less than a year later into the academy. So with no knowledge that I would be an officer, I enlisted in the Navy. And when I got out, I did go to a headhunter that still exists. I won't name them, but they still specialize in placing transitioning military. And, I think they understood the challenges of transitioning military, but they did absolutely no training at all for me.
Right.
And as do all transitioning military members, the Navy put me through Transition Assistant Program or TAP course. And and a secondary course that they allowed that officers could take if they wanted. And I believed everything that I was told in those courses, and
So
sadly,
did I.
most of what I was told was wrong. And
Yep.
I didn't realize, I didn't know this at the time, of course. And it wasn't for a couple of years after I joined industry did I learn one by one, well, what they told me about how to write a resume was wrong. What they told me about how to
Mm-hmm.
interview was wrong. What they told me about how to negotiate for my compensation was wrong. What they told me about, what the company was looking for in me was wrong. For example, one of the things that I absolutely wanted to believe was their line that all my future employer wants from me is good leadership. And I talk about that in the book, right? And how it deludes you into believing that you have everything you need to succeed in industry. And it sets transitioning veterans up to fail
Mm-hmm.
because just like good leadership isn't enough on active duty, if good leadership was enough on active duty, you could take a B-52 wing commander and put them on a submarine and make them CEO of a submarine and they do just fine.
That's a great point.
But of course, that's not true. You actually need to know something about the systems, tactics, procedures that you're going to be
Mm-hmm.
using in that command position. So it's no less true in industry. And when you transition to industry, I say in the book, you're going to be a second lieutenant over again. You need to think that way in a Navy, an ensign all
Mm-hmm.
over again. And
Yep.
you make that point in your podcast, by the way, as well. And it's funny how the two of us came to completely aligned opinions, taking very divergent views. You're in the recruiting talent management business. I was in the hiring manager business. I hired
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of veterans over the course of my 16 years in industry. And every one of them came into the job thinking that, hey, I'm already a good leader. Well, you might have been in your prior position, but what you're going to need to
Mm-hmm.
do in industry is going to be very different. And if you don't come to terms with that early in your industry career, this is not going to go well for you.
Yeah, it was interesting when I transitioned, and we won't name those transition firms.
Right.
You don't know what you don't know. And so for me, because I think I've talked about it on podcasts, I don't recall, but I went through the TAP and the ACAP, and I'm believing everything is true.
Mm-hmm.
Gullible. I mean, there's probably still a scar on the side of my face where the fish hook had buried itself in because I was so believing of everything. But I think the challenge for me was it took me a number of years to realize, and I have faulted the military for this.
Mm-hmm.
And I've offered countless times back at my base, Fort Hood, Texas. What happens is people retire and
Mm-hmm.
then they want to get a government contracting job. So they go into the TAP or the ACAP center and they've never been in corporate America. So they're teaching them the wrong right. They have zero basis of knowledge to instruct what it means to transition. So to your point, you're just sitting there thinking it's true and it's like made up out of whole cloth.
It's the blind leading the blind. It's not their fault. People think I'm
Yeah,
beating up on the
exactly.
government, but the government does a superb job teaching you about your VA benefits when you
Oh,
transition.
yeah.
There's some things that they do, yeah. But it is the blind leading the blind. It's not their fault. They have never done this. They're reading from a curriculum that was written by somebody who, if they really succeeded in industry, they'd still be doing that. They
Yeah,
would still be
exactly.
doing, because why would they leave, right? So it's written by people who didn't rise to the level of president or CEO like I did. And so they don't really know what it takes to succeed. And it's worse there, George. I got to tell you that since I decided to write this book, once I got the curriculum all together in the form of a book, I reached out to all four services. There's an office within each of the services that manage globally each of the services transition classes for all of the
Mm-hmm.
various bases, right? The courses are taught locally, but the curriculum is managed globally at each of the four service headquarters. And I said, hey, look, let me help you with this. Let me help you improve the curriculum because there's so much that you're still teaching. And the evidence of that is people that I'm hiring that have been taught wrong. There's so much that you're still teaching that's wrong. Look, I'll do this for free. I will help you
Yep.
improve your curriculum for free. They won't even talk to me, George. Here's a guy who served as CEO, who has hired thousands of veterans over the years and knows what they're good at, what they need to get better at before they transition. And they won't even talk to me. It's a tragedy. And so it's like they don't even care. That's the part that gets me.
And I got to be honest with you, it's my feeling that they're caring even less now because of, people being deployed so much and, not staying the full 20. But, we share that similar vein insofar as I was, the other thing that I didn't know, and we'll get onto the company side here soon, is when I met these veteran transition firms, again, I was believing what I was told. And I had no reason not to. I mean, we had grown up in a world where integrity and what you said was your word, was everything.
That's exactly.
You said you're going to do something, you'd go do it. And how I look back and I think, I literally look at myself and think, wow, what an idiot. How did I miss this? And I get it. I've forgiven myself since. But I always thought that the veteran firms were in it for the veterans. And it was this complete oversight on my part, forgetting that the person paying the fee is the company. And so I quickly learned about the whole puppet master of how these firms are doing. I don't want to take away from the help and the guidance and the good things that they're doing and the intent. But it's really what drove me into coaching veterans pro bono. And then I set up the first junior military officer hiring program at KPMG Consulting. It went over to Deloitte's program. I set one up at HP. I'd assist now and again on the one at Booz Allen Hamilton.
And I was a hiring manager at HP, by the way.
Oh, wow.
I ran the defense business at HP for almost 5 years.
Wow, that is crazy. Who was the head of public sector when you were there? You remember?
Well, I had two, Dennis Stolke and Marilyn Crother.
I know them both.
Yeah, and so I was...
Small world.
Yes, right. And so Meg Whitman was the CEO. And Meg, when she was the third CEO from when I was there, and she's a great American supporter of defense. And so she treated, since I ran the defense business, first the Navy business, then the defense business, she treated me as if I worked for her because she took great interest in the defense business. And we did a great job hiring. By the way, that's where a lot of my lessons were accumulated in, what we needed to make sure the veterans understood as we hired them. I accumulated a lot of those lessons then.
See, during that period, what's interesting, which you may or may not have figured out, is that was part of enterprise services.
Correct. Used to be.
And so the global hiring for enterprise services was run by me.
Okay, yeah. Used to be EDS, and HP bought EDS, and it became part of enterprise services. Right, and I was in that part of it.
And I love that I hired veterans, but, I went on to... the Talent Work Group, we've done a lot of webinars. We've talked about inviting you to, share your knowledge and experience and wisdom with transitioning military. But, I want to dig into the company side and what companies can do because, my first start, and I thought I had a brilliant idea, which was, look, KPMG Consulting, which was the public sector side of KPMG, then spun off and became Bearing Point. I looked around and the head of the defense space, the head of the Navy, the people that ran DOJ, Department of Treasury were all military veterans. And I remember talking to them and I said, well, you guys made it. Why aren't you hiring more veterans? And so, I always joke. I don't know if they thought I had a great idea or they were tired of hearing me bitch and moan about them not supporting fellow veterans, but they let me go do it. And, it became successful. So I got to do the prep. I got to teach them about what it really, really was. But, I had the front end of the deal and I wanted to get more veterans in and I didn't necessarily have the time to build the things. Eventually we went on to build a boot camp. But over the course of my time in the veteran space, I've watched who was at JP Morgan pledge to hire tens of thousands. And I watched tens of thousands go in. I watched the attrition rate just skyrocket. To your point, they'll go in, they burn out, they fail out. I've watched every company, so many companies commit to hiring veterans for all the right reasons. And it's like throwing them in the deep end of the pool and hoping that they swim in the middle of sharks. So when you talk to companies, what are usually anywhere from top 1 to top 5 things that companies could be doing better.
Mm-hmm.
Because here's what's driving me nuts. Veteran unemployment is higher generally. Now, there's some of that we've all deployed and we're like, hey, I want to go back to my hometown and you're location restricted, which I try to beat out of a veteran's head every chance I get.
I do too, by the way.
Yeah, it's like, look, chase opportunity. I told a joke. Sometimes I get off track here a little bit, so you'll have to bear with me, Bill. Is I would tell veterans, I said, I landed in Austin, Texas, but I'm a Kansas City Chiefs fan.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not near my family in Kansas City, but if I want to go see a Kansas City Chiefs game, I go.
Exactly.
My time is mine. If I want to go see a Royals game, I go. If I want to go see now Sporting Kansas City because I'm a soccer fanatic, I go. I said location doesn't matter as much. But back to the point of companies, if you had all the CEOs, because they're facing this, the great resignation, the great regret, they're not getting enough people, veterans, you and I agree, it's like you couldn't have a better pool.
Correct.
What do you tell them to do differently?
Well, so the interesting thing is I wrote the book in the voice of it. I'm speaking to the veteran, but it wasn't an epiphany. It was like one of my hiring manager friends, one of my friends in talent acquisition, read the book and said, my goodness, Bill, this book is written for me. It's written for talent acquisition. It's written for the people in HR in the hiring company because it tells me everything I need to know to help the veteran succeed. Even though you don't seem to be talking to me, you're talking to me. And that's when I said, look, I need to really leverage that. He's right. So there's a lot that I cover in the book because like we said about those people teaching the transition assistance courses, they don't know what they don't know. The hiring companies don't know what they don't know. And so what I try to do in the book is illuminate that as well. So an example, I tell my active duty friends, and this is in the book, right? You may be a good leader. Leadership is hard, but it's even harder when you're leading people who can actually quit. And the point I'm making there is I was leading a submarine. I was in command of a submarine, and I tried to use all the good leadership principles you would lead to get everybody focused on the mission, aligned to the mission. But at the final analysis, if they didn't agree with me, there was no place for them to go.
Exactly.
That is not true in industry. People vote with their feet. And if you're losing your employees, you're going to lose your employees because they're going to leave. And that's your failure. That's not their failure. And so when I coach transitioning veterans, I say you really need to rethink your method of leadership. That's point number one. And for companies that are hiring those veterans, it's really important for them to understand the perspective. I'm not saying that you got to recalibrate every transitioning veteran, but I will say that there are signals, there are precursors, signs that an employer can detect potentially in a transitioning veteran that's going to tell the company whether or not this veteran's going to have a bit of a challenge adjusting. I talk in the book about one of my first assignments after I joined this company. By the way, I joined a company, we figured out really quickly that we had a misalignment. What they thought they were getting with me and what I thought I was getting in my job were very different. And the happy news about this company was we figured it out and they decided to adjust and train me. And I benefited from that for the rest of my career, right? I would not have risen to the position of CEO if that company didn't recognize early on that I may not have known everything that they assumed I knew. And they decided I was worth investing in. And they trained me, and that was wonderful. The other point I make with companies and employees is that, there's this book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There, right?
Yeah.
And I recommend every transitioning military member read this book. And I recommend every company hand my book to transitioning military members. But if they hand a second book, give them that book because the book makes the point that the more successful you've been in past environments, the more likely you are to fail in future environments because you're going to presume that your past successes will lead or somehow leveraged for success in the future. even if the environment changed, the conditions changed, the people changed, the resources changed, the mission has changed. And the point is, your past successes sometimes give you an inappropriate degree of confidence that cause you to fail in future endeavors. And so, but I cover that in the book as well. So, I mean, that's
The
point number
disease
2.
of success.
Yeah, the disease of success, exactly. And the third point I cover with companies is that sometimes transitioning veterans struggle to find the mission. When they were on active duty, the mission was self-actualizing, right? It was obvious. It was defense of the country, national security, all of those things. Sometimes when they can transition to industry, they think that it's all about the money, and it's not. And people who succeed in industry who've never served know that there's a higher purpose, that there's a higher calling. There's an altruistic, aspect of the company and the industry that needs to be served. And the success comes when they understand the mission. But sometimes transitioning military people struggle to find that mission. And if they don't find it, they have difficulties self-motivating. And that causes some failure. But there's a whole bunch of other things in the book as well.
Yeah, I just cracked it open. I took a trip up to Mother's Day and the book is waiting for me. So I can't wait to dig into it.
Thank you.
Simply because I almost was going to write a book on this topic, but we wrote The Talent War with Mike Sorelli and, my co-author, my good friend. And we were so happy to write it just about what talent looks like. But I can't wait to read it because it's such a gap for veterans. And,
and your book is vital. It's written from the standpoint of talent acquisition. My book is written from the standpoint of 15 years of hiring veterans and watching too many of them fail. And I was engaging one-on-one counseling veterans, and I said, look, this is not efficient. There's got to be a better way to get the word out more broadly. And I didn't intend to write the book, but as I started writing things down, I said, holy cow, when this thing's done, it's going to be a book. Let's see if we can get it published. And that's why it ended up that way.
It is. And writing a book I don't know about you, but by the time Mike and I got done, we hated our book at the end of it. We were just tired of reading it over and over and over.
And you think the journey is done, but it took a year from the day I finished to getting it in bookstores, right? Then that was something that I didn't understand. Even if you find a publisher, they want their developmental editor have a crack at it. Then you've got copy editing. Then you've got typesetting and proofreading. And then printing took 2 months, right? And then and so
we had to go through DOD. We had to go through DOD and get the stamp of approval because we were talking so much about special operations. So we got our fair share of redactions. But what was interesting to me is as you would hire veterans, when I'm talking with hiring managers, one of the things that I've been able to stress, well, I've always stressed it, but I think it's resonating more, is as we face the Great Resignation, you have this amazing talent pool. And I will tell you, the teams I build are hiring over 80 that have hired over 80,000 people. And so I've seen my fair share of resumes, hiring managers at scale. And what has always driven me nuts is you get hiring managers that write this job description and there are 25 things that this person needs to have. And like we talked about in the talent war, they're not talking about the attributes. They're talking about the hard skills or something, certification or degree or whatever. And, they're still stuck in that old mindset when military people have this, first of all, I tell them, look, the stickability is outrageous. It's such a difference. Once a military person, they want to land somewhere. They want to have that mission. They want to earn the money. They'll stick. But getting hiring managers out of that mode to look at military people. But here's where I wanted to go. I wanted to ask you this interesting question. And I don't do any gotcha questions. But as I've helped people learn how to interview military veterans, for me, the hardest part is let me put it to you this way. The toughest question that I ask a military leader is describe for me your leadership style. Normally one would think that that's the softball question. You should be able to knock that out of the park. But it turns out over 20 plus years of doing this, that it's the hardest question because they're doing it by muscle memory. and they've never had to articulate it. And I haven't gotten there. So what do you advise veterans on explaining how they lead, how they learn, how they train, how they mentor, they coach? What do you emphasize to them to be more successful in the interview process?
Yeah, so I really try to emphasize with veterans the need for situational leadership, to have a adaptable leadership style that conforms to the requirement. Because, I say that, look, in an operational tactical situations, you had to be a very assertive, directive leader because the time demands, the urgency demanded it. In most cases in industry, there won't be that driving factor. There won't be an urgency where you need to be very directive in your leadership style. And in fact, being directive is going to chase good people away because people in 2022 don't react well to that. And in fact, when early in my industry career, one of my first jobs was firing an employee who was a transitioned Air Force 1-star. And so part of it was a test for me to see if I would fire the general. And part of it was the guy really did need to go. And when HR was talking me through why we were letting him go, they referred to him as a, quote, command and control leader, unquote. And that really confused me because in the military, you exercise command and control of forces, and it's a good thing, right? And I couldn't imagine why she thought being a command and control leader was a bad thing. And as she explained it to me, it became apparent that they had hijacked this military expression that we use on active duty and morphed it to mean something different. And when HR uses the expression command and control, what they mean is he's a kind of leader who barks out commands and exercises inappropriate control of his employees. And so being a command and control leader is a bad thing, not a good thing in industry. And so it was kind of an epiphany. And in fact, the general was losing people because he was very directive, very rough on people, did not suffer fools, was too direct, didn't think that building teams was important, didn't understand that it required different methods to build teams in industry than it did in the Air Force. Again, to repeat, leadership is harder when the people you're leading can actually quit, and his people were quitting. So that's really the thing. It's to morph your leadership style into one that's more appropriate to industry. However, there will be situations, and most of them are emergency situations. And I talk in the book about the time when there was a subcontractor who worked for my business who was the Washington Navy Yard shooter. You'll remember that.
I do. Yeah,
2012, I think. And so we were reacting to that. I had 50 employees in the Washington Navy Yard, and we stood up a crisis action team. And at that time, I'm running this thing. I'm running the business. These are my employees. I had to fall back on those very directive leadership styles I exerted when I was on active duty, right? Okay, I want you to do this. You guys are going to do that. Set up a phone line to the FBI. You fall back on those skills. You set up a phone line to headquarters. Headquarters will deal with, informing the public. It was very bizarre because I ended up sending out situation reports and hearing Wolf Blitzer repeat them in near real time on CNN. It was bizarre. But, the point I make is don't forget how to lead in that fashion. But you're almost never going to be called on to lead in that fashion. It's going to be much more soft, coaching, servant leadership style. And if you haven't learned that on active duty, you better learn quickly because the guys who fail to learn are going to fail.
This episode is sponsored by Talent War Group, a management consulting and executive search firm. We help you attract, retain, and develop your top talent because we know that the most valuable asset within your organization is your talent. With services like leadership development, talent acquisition and HR consulting, executive search, executive coaching, and keynote speeches, we work with you to create talent solutions to your most pressing business problems. You can get started by finding us at talentwargroup.com and let us help you develop your next generation of leaders. Also, if you like what we're doing here at the podcast, please leave a review as it helps us support and continue this podcast. It helps us support people who are really dedicated to improving their business skills and excelling above all else. So outside of the leadership style, if you had to pick your top 3 things that you want to share with veterans to better articulate, because we're still, it's like putting 2 magnets together sometime. You have these hiring managers that still, despite the high attrition, are still listing out objective requirements and not defining success, not listing, the attributes, and then not investing in the hire. Like, hey, if that drives me nuts, as I remember talking to, as part of the top 50 leadership group at this company. And I got a chance to talk to the leadership group. And I said, look, every hire that doesn't make it is a failure on your part. That's where you need to start.
That's exactly right.
Oh, you would have thought I called the Pope a Baptist. I mean, the heads were spinning. It was like sacrilege. But, they still list these requirements. So veterans still have a lot of hurdles to get over in, if they get to the interview stage. And so what top 2 or 3 things that you share with people? I'm anxious to learn how you approach it and what you share with veterans. And I'll be through the book by the end of the week. But for our listeners, what do you tell veterans about how to articulate their true value and what they can bring to the companies that they've applied to?
Well, I do cover all 3 aspects, basically from the job search, getting hired, and then 2, how to succeed in the job. And then the third phase is how to excel and get promoted. So the book does cover all of those aspects. But the first thing I would say is that when my transition course, I call it The Great Lie, told me that all my company was looking for was good leadership. So, I try to teach the veterans is there is something they're looking for from you. And you kind of get to this point when you say, hire for talent, teach for skills. I think you say something like that, right?
Hire for character, train for skill.
Exactly right. Yeah. So I came to it independently. And what I talk about is the veteran needs to convey one thing. It's not great leadership. It's an informed passion to learn. That's the way I characterize it. Informed because you cannot forget all this great stuff you've learned over the course of your active duty. The company will want to leverage all of that learning. And you can't just discard your history there. Passion, because active duty folks have learned how to drive through the suck.
Yep.
And companies want to hire people with a fire in their belly. And nobody's going to bring that to bear more than folks that have been on active duty, right? So that's informed passion. And the third bit is to learn, because none of you veterans are going to come to that company with all of the information you need, all of the knowledge you need to succeed. And the hiring company needs to know that. They need to know that the veteran's not going to come to you with all the information they need to succeed. But what the veteran can come to them with, and what the veteran needs to prove to the hiring company they have, is the ability to learn. And of course, the veterans change jobs every couple of years. And when they changed job, they were put in a position where they would need to learn the new job. So they've done this. And even in the resume, I say, you've got to demonstrate with evidence, not with hand-waving statements, the fact that you have an informed passion to learn, because that's the most beneficial thing you can bring to your new employer.
It really is, because I gave a speech and I was talking to, as I say, my people, 75 HR and talent acquisition professionals. And I said, when you talk to your hiring managers, you talk about these job descriptions. To your point about the passion to learn, I said, I want everybody to raise their hand if your job description and job duties changed dramatically within the first 120 days. And every hand in the room went up.
Right, of course.
And so to your point, and that's what I share with veterans is, companies ultimately are looking for a number of things. And I break it down into the simple, because, you get the veterans that come to you and they say, hey, I want 125, I want 150, I finally want to make some money. And I'm like, listen, you have to prove to a company ultimately that you can earn 3x, 4x, or earn 4x for the company what they're going to compensate you at.
Yep.
So if you can't prove that value, whatever the situation, ultimately that's what they've got to figure out. And I said, they're also looking for potential.
Mm-hmm.
And military people have that in spades.
Absolutely.
I mean, they actually, some of the most dreaded terms in the military were hurry up and wait. We don't like to be bored. We like to be doing things. We like to be learning something new. And so to demonstrate that potential is absolutely huge. So if you were to give 3 tips to hiring managers as to why or how they should look at veterans, what would you be telling the group of hiring managers that have not dealt with the veterans as a talent pool before? I mean, what would you tell them that really is a statement that says, listen, this strengthens the fabric of your organization? What do you tell them?
So even if you're hiring a veteran at a position an entry-level position that may look like the same kind of position a recent college graduate is going into, what you've done is you're going to put a person in that position. It's going to be on steroids, basically. Their ability to accelerate their learning and their progression in the job and contribute more will be 2 to 3x times that recent college graduate. And I say this based on experience and evidence, not based on, what I wish it would like to be. So I've hired junior officers out of, their first tour of duty on active duty into an entry level program management position alongside an MBA, and watch that junior officer accelerate and move up the ranks. I use that word, it's a bad word, but move up the career path progression, substantially faster because of all of this life experience that veteran will have had and the ability to learn. And you think, well, in MBA, they've been going to school. It's not the same thing, right? It's not the same thing. And so you're going to get way more bang for the buck for the investment you put in that veteran than you will an equivalent on somebody else. Take me as an example. When I first was hired into my first company, I was promoted into a vice president position within 2 years of being a new hire. And when I was promoted into that vice president position, it was over, roughly 20,000 employees who'd been there longer than I had, right? And I'd like to think that it worked out well for both of us because I was hired out of that position into another, position in another company that had even more responsibility and so on and so forth. And within 10 years, I was hired into my first president of a business unit position. You can't explain that accelerated success without my 26 years of active duty experience behind me. You just can't. It just doesn't happen if I hadn't had the experience that I had before I entered industry.
Yeah, I had the very same thing. I had to make, and I've told the story, but I was a consultant. I was actually working not far from you, but I was working out of the Fort Belvoir. I was working on the Army PEO and had a family circumstance which said, hey, I need to get back to Texas, but they didn't have anything except tech at the time. And so I took a job in HR and just, for me, that just launched everything. And I, would never have guessed. I mean, it was just fate and it turned out really, really well. But I loved creating the veterans programs, the veterans that I've hired. I had somebody reach out to me 20 years after I hired him into that company and said, hey, remember me? I was like, oh my God, yeah. A couple people that I've hired are now managing directors at large consulting firms. They've gone on to be VPs, SVPs. And it's great to watch. To your point, it's when they're humble and when they recognize that they have to adapt to a new environment and pull all of that together and be a servant leader, adapt to the circumstances, that all of that behind you is a tailwind.
Absolutely.
When you use it the right way, your ego is going to be the headwind. To your point about the 1 star, that it's just ego. Like, I know what I'm doing. I've been here. the disease of success. I'm complacent. I'm going to keep doing things the same way, even though they're not working.
Because they've worked in the past.
Yeah, exactly. I'm grateful that you wrote a book. I'm grateful to dig into it because there hasn't been, this is a little bit of a broad statement. I want to be careful because I know there's so many people with great intent writing good books to help military people kind of close that gap and jump. And I always applaud that. The interviewing advice that I've seen coming out of TAP and ACAP and the books that I've read is horrible. Absolutely. What was the term we used in the Army? Jailhouse lawyer. It's like when you're in jail and you're getting advice from your fellow inmates about, oh yeah, this was illegal. It's like they have no idea what they're talking about. But I'm going to give you the last word, and you and I are going to talk again. You're going to come talk to our candidates on webinars. I'm so grateful you wrote the book, and I'm going to do a really, the intro about it. It's going to be wonderful.
I appreciate
I'm going to give you the last word on. You get to pick anything. Normally, I ask, what did you learn now that you could do better? You wish you knew at age 22, but I'm going to leave it open for you.
Well, what I'll say is, look, writing a book is a lot of work. I didn't want to write a book. I tried to look for a book that I could hand to candidates and say, here, read this. So I bought them all and I read them all. And most of them are, to use another military word, pablum, right? Easy to digest, but of no benefit. It's hand-waving advice on make sure you can communicate the mission to but it doesn't tell you how. The subtitle of my book is A Practical Guide for Transitioning from Military to Industry Leadership. So it's from CO to CEO, a practical guide for transitioning from military to industry leadership, because that's what was missing. What was missing was the practical step-by-step guide on what you need to do to convert your brain and your learning to help you get a good job and succeed in that job. So I ended up writing the book because it didn't exist. And so I hope your listeners benefit from it on the industry side, on the company side, as well as on the candidate side.
Well, we are certainly going to be sharing it with all of our candidates, without doubt, that we come into. And I'm going to start including it in my speeches because you're right, there is no practical guide. And there are a few books out there. The one that I do recommend, I won't name it, but you could erase half of the book because it's hubris about how great they are and why they exist and why they're the best, versus getting into, hey, this is what you need to know about yourself. This is how you articulate that. This is how you turn this into a successful interview where you're getting multiple offers. But Bill, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I wanted to take more time because I have to tell you, we're both of the age where, Jaws was a great movie. And, the USS Indianapolis, one of these times you're going to have to come back and tell me about your work with that, because I think it's one of the most fascinating stories out there.
No, happy to do that.
Oh, my God. I
always love to talk about that ship and its great crew.
Oh, my God. But I remember once Google came around, Google was not out when the movie came out. So people were looking to the Encyclopedia Britannica, and it was not very good. But Bill, happy to have you on. The book, folks, is From CO to CEO, A Practical Guide. Practical being the optimal term here for transitioning from the military to industry leadership. Bill, can't thank you enough for being on the Talent War podcast. We wish you much success, and we hope to have you back soon.
Happy to do it. See you.
Thanks. And thank you for listening to the Talent War podcast, where we discuss all things talent, focusing on a talent mindset, the core belief that the only true competitive advantage you can hope to achieve and maintain is your talent. Join us for the next episode of the Talent War podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you heard, subscribe and please leave a review. Connect with me on Talent War Group's LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram accounts, and send your comments and inquiries to media@talentwargroup.com. The Talent War podcast is brought to you by the Talent War Group, a management, consulting, and executive search firm. We work with you, bringing services like talent acquisition, leadership development, executive search, executive coaching, seminars, speaking engagements, all to create talent solutions for your most pressing business problems. To get started, visit us at www.talentwargroup.com.